Hey guys, it's Gloith here from Renegade Squadron. Today I want to talk to you about something awesome that happened this past Thursday, and that I'm a proud owner of an RTX 3090. Alright guys, before I roll the footage and commentary, I want to give a big shout out to Mark Seeger for joining us on the Renegade Squadron YouTube channel. We appreciate your support, and if you're looking to become a member, make sure to hit that join button. Alright guys, we've got the new RTX 3090 specs here right in front of us. This is built on Samsung's 8nm process, packing in a whopping 28 billion transistors. It's a little bit smaller die than the previous one, but it's got a lot more SM, and then it's also got a heck of a lot more GPU cores. So we're looking at 10,496 cores and compared to the 4352 of the 2080 Ti. However, what is interesting is that it has less tensor and RT cores than the previous generation. That being said, it looks like it keeps its overall base and boost clocks while improving on its VRAM speed by cranking it up to 19.5 gigabits per second. And on top of that, cranking the VRAM up to 24 gigabytes compared to the 11. Another improvement is the increase in the ROMs, the TMUs, and the T-flops, all increasing significantly. And as we can see, despite having less tensor cores, it's just dramatically more efficient. Additionally, we see a whole increase in the RT flops as well. One of the most noticeable changes is the increase in bandwidth to really drive that 8K resolution home. Now, that does come with a higher TDP, as you can see, of 350, which is pretty much almost maximizing out the spec for two 8-pin connectors. After all, we get 150 watts per 8-pin connector plus 75 watts via the PCI connector. Lastly, Nvidia decided to increase the price of their Halo product to $1,499 MSRP, but I'll tell you this right now, you're going to be paying a lot more than that. Alright guys, our first benchmark is Metro Exodus. This is a very well optimized game with ray tracing, and as we will see here shortly, we're getting about 177 frames per second, pretty much a 33% improvement over the 2080 Ti at that low resolution ultra-wide. And then as you'll see, we also have a fairly decent scaling of 36% at 16:9. That is not an ultra-wide resolution, but I thought I'd throw it in there for you rest of you guys that might not have an ultra-wide. Then we have our native 3440 by 1440p monitor. That's the most popular form of 21:9 monitor, and that is kicking out 120 frames a second, essentially a 33% improvement, which is awesome. Then we've got our 5160 by 2160. This is a DSR resolution. There are some monitors out here that are ultra wide like that, and it was kicking out 48 frames a second, which is pretty much a 50% improvement. And then lastly, we have our native DSR, essentially 4X. This is like 8K to ultra wide, and we're getting 27 frames a second with a 48% improvement at 6880 by 2880. However, at this resolution, it's just not playable quite yet on this title. Alright, our next title is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. This is a title that takes place in Greece and is actually fairly well optimized up to a point where you essentially hit kind of a memory limitation, and we're going to talk about that when we see the benchmarks. So at 1080p ultra wide, we are at 21% scaling, not as good as Metro Exodus at 33%. And as we can see at 2K, it's kind of weird. It's not as good as you would think it would be. It should scale better, but it doesn't. And then at 3440 by 1440p, the native resolution for ultra wide for 21:9, 24%, not really great. And then 5160 by 2160, a little bit better, almost hitting 30% scaling. But what's awesome is 6880 by 2880. Because we've got so much more memory on the 3090, we're able to go above 11 gigabytes, and that really pays off. It actually takes a game that is unplayable and makes it playable at such a crazy resolution. So pretty awesome stuff. Next up is Doom Eternal, and as you can see, there's just so many options. You know, Doom is literally the pinnacle of performance. This is what every game wants to be in terms of performance. And one day, hopefully when CIG gets Vulcan implemented into Star Citizen, we'll see the same. As you can see, it just knocks it out of the park at 295 FPS at 1080p ultra-wide. As we go to 2K, still at 292 FPS, just doing awesome. Then we get to 3440 by 1440p, the native resolution, and we're at 245 FPS, just phenomenal. And then as we scale up, 5160 by 2160, 133 FPS, and look at that. We are over 60 FPS at 6880 by 2880. Just amazing scaling at 57.27%. Just imagine how much fun Star Citizen would be if we had this type of FPS. Next up is Far Cry 5. So what's unique about this game is that it uses the Duna engine. And if a person goes back in the history of this franchise, the Duna engine is just like Lumberyard. It branched off from CryEngine, the very first CryEngine. So there's a lot of similarities between this game and Star Citizen. As we take a look at 1080p ultra-wide, we notice that there's only 14% scaling, and it actually decreases down to 12 at 2K, and then picks back up at 3440 by 1440p. And as we increase the resolution further, we start to see the performance we're used to seeing, like 31.62% at 5160 by 2160, and a 33% boost at 6880 by 2880. While the game is able to put out a decent frame rate, its performance scaling is horrible. Now this is due to the fact that it has most of its physics going on just a few threads, very similar to Star Citizen. Alright guys, this is the benchmark that everyone's been waiting for. Can a 3090 run Star Citizen? Well, to help answer that question, we've decided to run the test in third-person mode so it doesn't have to load the UI, since that can vary ship to ship. First off, we've got 1080p ultra-wide rocking 155 FPS per second. However, we have a measly 7.51% scaling over the 2080 Ti with the 3090. This is no doubt the CPU being bottlenecked due to the physics threads being maxed. However, this starts to change as we go to 2K at 150 frames per second, which is a 21.51% scaling increase. And then we go to the sweet spot, which is 3440 by 1440p, and that's rocking a 30.41% scaling increase, which is awesome. As we move to 4K ultra-wide, we notice that the scaling kind of actually drops off a little bit, but we're still at a playable frame rate, which is super important for those that have got those bigger monitors. However, the game is simply unplayable at 6880 by 2880 at 38 FPS. As you can see, Star Citizen is extremely CPU bottlenecked, especially at lower resolutions. As we take a look at the data, we can see columns AP and AV, our physics threads, are being utilized quite a bit. And as they get utilized, we start to see our GPU utilization drop significantly, all the way down to 57% at 2560 by 1080p. Now it's worth pointing out that doing some benchmarking in free flight single player is that this is the most consistent, but also the best case scenario. The reality is that when we load in the UI for many different ships, when we add more players, more NPCs, and more destructibles, we start to see the frame rates start to drop significantly because these two physics threads are being maxed out even further. Due to the nature of Star Citizen's CPU bottleneck, it is highly advisable that if you want to get the most out of your 3090 or even your 3080, make sure you're playing at a resolution greater than 2K, as that's going to use the GPU a lot more, and as a result, it's not going to be demanding as many frames from the CPU. Alright guys, I'm going to wrap up this benchmark video. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, and comment on any of our videos made in the month of September for your chance to win that Tavaran Talon Fighter. I'll see you guys next time. Renegade Squadron signing up.